Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragon's Jewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan. And I'm just going to get all those wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so. It's just down below. And if you like the content, please make sure you're hitting the like button on the videos. And of course, if you want to share some love down in the comments below, it's always greatly appreciated. And I absolutely love reading them. I do my best to make sure that I respond back and share some love in your direction as well, because naturally without you, this channel wouldn't exist. And I appreciate each and every one of you. And I thought I would bring some of those Halloween spooky vibes to the channel. There are going to be in the WIP and Chat style format, but I'm going to read some ghost stories of Alberta, which is the province that I reside in. So I will have a spooky canvas that I'll be working on, and then I'm going to read a couple of ghost stories so that you can listen along while you dab and paint, or work on another craft, or what you normally do during WIP and Chats kind of thing, and I keep you company with some spooky tales from my province. So I figured that would be fun. We do have a ghost at the Princess. Theaters are often given regal names. The Royal, the Empress, and the Princess are common. During certain later periods of a theater's lifetime, these pretentious names can be in stunning contradiction to their states of disrepair. For a time, this situation was certainly the case with Edmonton's Princess Theatre. When it opened in 1915, the Princess was proclaimed as one of the grandest houses, boasting the largest stage in Western Canada, and promising a program of high-class moving pictures, varied occasionally with high-class musical vaudeville or musical concerts. Until 1940, the Princess reigned alone in its splendor as the only theater on Edmonton's south side. By the time it was closed in 1958, the place was badly run down, with only its name remaining grand. During the next 15 years, the theater deteriorated even further as parts of the building were used intermittently as retail outlets, and other areas remained vacant, or more correctly, almost vacant. During the theater's design in 1914, architects Wilson and Harold incorporated a couple of unusual and potentially profitable additions into their plans. For instance, the building's basement became home to a billiards club, though the cinema with its balcony and projection booth took up 2 full stories above the auditorium. Mr. Wilson and Mr. Harold included an additional level. This floor was rented out over the years, first as office space and later as a rooming house. The Princess didn't welcome another theater audience until 1973. While the theater's reopening was decidedly low-key, it attracted sufficient attention to lead to government recognition of the facility as a historical resource. Today it has been restored and is operated by the Old Strathcona Foundation as Edmonton's only repertory theater. Its locations for this purpose couldn't be better. Nestled among the shops, restaurants, and coffee houses of the once again popular White Avenue, the Princess is a favorite with film buffs of all ages and inclinations. It's also haunted. Staff at the Princess speak openly about their experiences with the ghost, their only regret being that they're not sure who the ghost could be, or if there's only one. Former director Brian Paisley is inclined to think the spirit is that of a previous tenant from the days when the 3rd floor area was used as a rooming house. He knows he's heard the sound of footsteps coming from the story above the theater, which hasn't been occupied for years. Mary Pearson, the theater's manager, had a more direct experience with the ghost.
I was alone in the theater. I had to go into the projection booth, she began, pausing in her story to explain that this part of the theater juts out above the second-story balcony seats. On this particular day, Mary was not to accomplish what she'd gone into the projectionist's area to do. Just as she began the task at hand, she heard knocking at the window. It was a distinct sound. There was no mistaking it for anything else. Someone had knocked on the outside of the projection booth's front glass wall. Mary knew positively that she was alone, locked in an otherwise empty building. Although the experience frightened the young woman, it didn't surprise her completely, for she heard stories of the princess ghost from her colleagues. She knew she'd now experienced him too, because even if there'd been a full house, no ordinary human could have rapped on that window. For anything or anyone to have knocked on the glass, he or she would have had to defy a basic law of nature by standing in midair. Badly shaken, Mary fled the building. At least now Mary didn't need to feel left out when her co-workers told their tales about the ghost. By comparing experiences, employees at the Princess Theatre have come to the conclusion that aside from his shock value, there is nothing innately frightening about their resident ghost. He apparently doesn't want to harm anyone, but he just doesn't seem to want to be forgotten either. Leslia Kroll worked at the theatre from the summer of 1989 until the fall of 1992, managing it for the last year and a half of her tenure. As theatre manager, Leslie was required to begin work earlier than most of the other employees, and so she was often alone in the cavernous old building. The first time I became aware of the ghost, I was standing in the concession booth counting chocolate bars. I heard a knocking on the wall across the lobby. At the time, there was a restaurant next door, which closed early on Sundays. The restaurant was empty when I heard the sound. Leslie found her own reaction to the experience as interesting as the experience itself. She since noted that she has usually had a similar reaction to something that startled or concerned her. I denied it. I thought, no, I didn't hear that. Unfortunately for Leslie Kroll's composure, the ghost didn't accept her denial reflex. I heard it again. This time I said hello, and then it stopped. Not wanting to risk losing her co-workers' respect, Leslie kept the experience to herself. Perhaps this limited reaction frustrated the ghost, because it tried again and again to get her attention. Finally, she was forced into the comfort of sharing her ghostly secret. Again, alone in the theater, Leslie was on the phone speaking with a friend, perhaps upset that the young woman was paying attention to someone other than itself. The ghost knocked quite loudly. My friend heard it too, explained a relieved but puzzled Leslie. This incident began an exchange of ghostly experiences among Princess staff members. Most had at least occasionally been aware of a presence. For the woman who did the cleaning, who usually worked alone in the place, the ghostly knocking and footsteps had become regular, if unwelcome additions to her working conditions. By the autumn of 1992, for reasons not related to the ghost, Leslie decided to seek employment elsewhere. On my second last day at the Princess, I took someone up to the marquee room. We both heard the distinct sounds of footsteps on the stairs with us, although we saw no one, and to our knowledge we were alone in a locked building. Perhaps the ghost was coming up to say goodbye to his longtime friend, or perhaps he was finally feeling comfortable enough with Leslie that he would have begun to communicate with her more directly. We'll never know. We do know, however, that whoever or whatever haunts the princess did not leave when Leslie did. The pragmatic Brian Paisley attested to the continuing presence of the spirit with classic simplicity. We do have a ghost here at the Princess. Oscar the Bad-Tempered Ghost. There were many theories about what a ghost might be. One idea is that what we identify as a ghost is leftover energy. This theory is useful in explaining why places where traumas have occurred tend to be haunted. It also could explain why poltergeists are especially attracted to adolescents, whose developing bodies are highly energized by surging hormones. At a more mundane level, we often see that spirits are intrigued by electrical energy and can draw attention to themselves by turning appliances such as washing machines, televisions, and VCRs on and off. Imagine then what fun a ghost would have surrounded by electrical devices and energy at a radio station. For many years, CHCL, an all-volunteer organization, was the radio station at the Canadian Forces Base in Medley, Alberta. Former music director Graham Wood shared the story of the haunted station with folklore collector Catherine Carter, who in turn passed it along to me. Wood explained early on in the report that he promised his fellow broadcasters they'd be guaranteed complete anonymity. For that reason, no names have been used throughout this chapter. He began his story on a note that any ghost hunter will find familiar. There's a definite feeling of unease permeating the rooms at the station. It's the feeling of not quite being alone, even though the rational part of us says that you're the only one visible, flesh and blood creature present. Many volunteer announcers at CHCL have questioned the wisdom of staying behind to do the late night show or getting up early to do the early bird show. Being alone at the station, it seems, is just plain not comfortable. No one at CHCL can remember who first began talking about Oscar. The legend was so widely accepted that veteran broadcasters wondered only when each new staff member would meet the resident phantom. Oscar is not a playful ghost, or at least his antics don't seem to be geared to entertain. To be fair, unless you count wear and tear on your nerves. Oscar doesn't seem to actively try to harm station members either. Oscar simply travels the halls being his own ghostly self, and unless provoked, is rarely obviously present. Research into who the ghost may have been while he was alive points to a lonely young serviceman. He departed this world rather suddenly one night over the Christmas holidays, back in the days when the rooms now housing CHCL were used as a barracks. It seemed that Oscar in his human form had a habit of consuming copious amounts of alcohol, and that his trait has followed him into the afterlife. In fact, one of the first signs that Oscar is back to haunt the living is the heavy smell of stale alcohol in the 45 RPMs records library. Like many folks who overindulge, Oscar occasionally found it difficult to control his emotions. Wood readily admitted he'd never stayed behind to witness these outbursts, but I've heard blow-by-blow accounts of Oscar's temper tantrums from people who were actually brave enough to stay at the station even for a few moments, while Oscar was active. I don't believe anyone has remained for the whole show, or at least if anyone has, they aren't talking. Usually these people decide that their curiosity has been satisfied at just about the time the plaques on the walls down the hallway begin to tremble, and then the heating and water pipes begin to bang, and the doorknobs begin to rattle from the pressure of unseen hands. You might say that these events are enough to encourage everyone to leave the station so that Oscar can finish his business in privacy. A married couple who volunteered for the early shift one Saturday morning first became aware of Oscar's presence when they were in one of his favorite haunts, the 45 library. As they opened the door to that room, their nostrils were assaulted by the odor of stale booze. As they were assessing the smell, a bone-chilling rush of frigid air rushed past them. Hoping the wind had come from an open window, the couple made their way across the room prepared to close the offending window. Their skeptical attitude changed quickly as they discovered the window to be tightly closed and felt the comforting heat of the radiator. They concluded that there was no immediate need to pull the records for the early morning show, and rapidly departed for a more comfortable atmosphere of the library where the long-playing records are stored. They closed the door to the 45 library as they left. Cold spots or the absence of heat are common characteristics of a haunted area. It is often presumed that the spirit draws the heat energy right out of the air. This certainly seemed to be the case at the Armed Forces radio station in Medley. According to Graham Wood, staff apparently found a practical solution to dealing with these chilled areas. Most people have learned to simply avoid these pockets while going about their business. Sooner or later, Oscar will move on and the cold spots will warm up again. Oscar's musical preference apparently did not die with him. The songs at the station that some people absolutely refuse to play after Oscar has noisily expressed his opinion of them. He will also, on occasion, play his own music. Various DJs have reported that every now and then the music can be heard playing in rooms other than the regular studio. Upon investigation, they discover that all the rooms are vacant, and they can only conclude that Oscar's busy again, expressing his individuality by playing his own choice of music instead of listening to their fare provided by the on-air DJ. We often associate ghosts with darkened areas, but Wood reports that Oscar likes the lights on. One conscientious announcer did the station shut down late one night. He diligently turned off all lights, emptied trash cans, and locked all the doors. When he arrived downstairs and walked across the parking lot to his car, he glanced up at the second floor to do a final visual check, only to see all the lights blazing again. The man may have been conscientious, but he wasn't stupid. He decided if Oscar wanted a dozen night lights, he could have them. Graham Wood concluded his story with an invitation to any doubters to stay alone in the CHCL building. Unfortunately, that test is no longer available, as the radio station ceased operations a few years ago. Calgary's haunted planetarium. It's always gratifying to watch the phone lines light up, and occasionally even jam, when ghosts are the topic on television or radio phone-in shows. Interest in the subject of phantoms is clearly high. Many people have questions, but others have had experiences that they wish to share. A gentleman who called John Hanlon's CBC show, Wild Rose Country, told a marvelous tale of a ghost in Calgary's Centennial Planetarium, now the Calgary Science Centre. He had worked there as a volunteer when the building first opened in 1967. He described overseeing the audience settling in for a show in the Star Theatre. Most nights the process would be unremarkable, but every now and again someone would complain that there was a man who wouldn't sit down. When the staff went to check, the offending image would simply vanish. This story was so enticing that I decided to visit the planetarium and see if I could get any more information. What your caller described as actually fairly common, acknowledged Marnie Haney, house supervisor at the planetarium. He's gone now, but he used to live in the old Star Theatre. We called him Sam. People would see him walking through the theatre during the show when all doors were closed, then he'd just disappear. He certainly didn't leave the theatre by a conventional route, because opening any of the doors to the darkened theatre would have let a noticeable amount of light in. The apparition simply vanished either into thin air or by walking through a wall. After a few incidents like this one, the staff at the planetarium came to realize that the man people occasionally saw walking around the theatre was not a flesh and blood human being, but a phantom. They began to pay more attention to the patrons' descriptions of the apparent intruder. He looked like a World War I soldier. I've seen him quite often. He was an interesting guy. You'd see him walking across the theater, but I've also heard his footsteps in the main foyer. He'd follow you. Marnie wonders if her strong Irish background could have made her more accepting of the Phantom than other people might be. But even she had her uncomfortable moments. If I was alone in the building working late at night and I heard him, I'd talk to him, tell him that's enough. Normally he'd leave then. Like most ghosts, Sam wasn't a constant presence. He came and went, apparently on his own schedule. However, according to Marnie, you'd know if he was around. One day, as Marnie and another employee worked, they could smell aftershave lotion. We searched the building carefully, and there was no one else here. The aftershave lotion smell was strongest in one particular spot, and that spot was cold. Very cold. After a while, the smell just disappeared. Other employees weren't quite as accepting of their ethereal co-worker as Marnie always was. We had cleaners refuse to go into the theater, and one woman quit after she'd been sitting alone in the theater and the seat beside her folded down, as though someone had just sat down in it. During one period, the experience of seeing Sam was dreaded by all on staff. For a while, it seemed that after every sighting, something terrible would happen. A girl who worked here saw him, and right after that, her father died. Then a man had a stroke almost immediately after seeing Sam. Thankfully, that pattern didn't continue. Working in a haunted place is one thing, but to feel potentially jinxed by the ghost would not have improved employee morale. The staff got used to him, Marnie told me with a somewhat wistful tone in her voice. You sound as though you miss Sam, I probed. You know I do miss him, Marnie replied with evident sincerity. It's been years now since anyone's seen Sam. Today, if the ghost in the World War I soldier's uniform came back to visit his old haunt, the Star Theatre, he'd hardly recognize the place. It's been completely renovated to take advantage of the incredible technological advances that have been made since the Planetarium opened back in Canada's centennial year. The new theatre is certainly most impressive, but it's not haunted for now. Given the great attraction that spirits seem to feel to things electrical and electronic, the Planetarium is most assuredly a likely future haunt. Almost as if to bear out this theory, Marnie added in passing that sometimes when you're downstairs in the lower area, you can hear a baby crying. A few people have heard it. Of course, there were no babies anywhere around. Perhaps one day the mystery of the phantom cries may be solved, but for now it only makes working at Calgary's Centennial Planetarium all that more interesting. Lethbridge Coffee Shop. Several years ago, Al Antisil began an ambitious business endeavor in downtown Lethbridge. He opened a bookstore and adjoining coffee shop. Al did much of the work to prepare the space for its new purposes himself. Considering the building was constructed in the very early days of the century, this preparation was quite an undertaking. It was during these renovations that he had his first encounter with the resident phantom. One day I was working in the basement, anchoring a half wall, he recalled. All of a sudden I got the creeps. I mean, really got the willies. I got really scared. I thought to myself, this is too weird, I'm shutting the place up and going home. Because this decidedly uncomfortable feelings had come on so suddenly, with no identifiable provocation, Al tried his best to put the entire experience out of his mind and get on with opening his business. To a great extent, he was successful until early one morning when he was baking cinnamon buns. I was working away when all of a sudden all the baking pans that we kept on the top of the double-door refrigerator came flying off. They didn't just drop. They flew about 10 feet. I was too scared. It was late at night, however, when Al was working in the bookstore, and he had his biggest fright. It was about 2 a.m., and I was doing the store accounts. Suddenly I heard bump, 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 bump. I went out from the office and saw that some books had fallen. I didn't think much of it. Books fall. I just picked them up and went back to what I was doing. Then I heard bump, 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 bump. This time about 20 books had fallen. I thought maybe a bus had gone past and the rumble had knocked the books off. I put them back up and again went back to my work. Al Antisil wasn't quite as calm with the next series of bumps. He ran into the store to find every book had fallen from its shelf and now lay on the floor. For the second time since he opened his adjoining business, the man beat a hasty retreat to the security of his home. About 2 years later, one of Al's employees actually saw the apparition. According to Al, Grant Smith was a great big guy, about 6 feet 1 inch and 280 pounds. He played football for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. One day he walked out from the back, and the way he swung his head around, I knew he'd seen something. He turned white. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he'd seen a woman. But she's not there now. Al was actually somewhat relieved by the sighting. At least we know it's a woman, he commented at the time. Oddly, that sighting marked the last of the ghostly hijinks. Although Al admits that no one has ever worked here alone, and no one will go into the basement except me. I still don't like it down there, but I know I have to go there sometimes. I've actually spoken out loud to the presence when I've been downstairs. Al has tried to probe into the haunting by questioning fellow business owners on the block. He couldn't get much confirmed, but has heard rumors that a nearby building once housed a brothel, and that the ghost may be a former madame. He also heard that nearby businesses have had similar problems. Apparently they were hearing voices. They got a Christian counselor or minister to deal with it, he reported. Since those first ambitious days of owning both the adjoining retail outlets, Al has sold B. Maccabee's bookstore to Leona King, who has quite a different take on why the ghost quieted down so suddenly. I hired Keith MacArthur as assistant manager. There haven't been any occurrences since then, she reported happily. Keith, a self-professed skeptic, replied to the implication that his presence might have put an end to the haunting by stating that everyone else talks about ghosts. I talk about gravity. Whatever the origin, whatever the remedy, the bottom line remains the same for these businesses. They're no longer bothered by their once resident spirit. The Ghosts of Jasper Park Lodge. People from all over the world come to Alberta to stay at the Jasper Park Lodge, and it's no wonder. The lodge really does have it all, including luxurious surroundings and alert, capable staff to cater your every need. All of this nestled in the grandeur of the Canadian Rockies. Oh yes, and ghosts too. Mario Rulli, sales coordinator for the establishment, explained that most of the haunting at the lodge seems to be done by a former employee believed to haunt the Point Cabin. Supposedly in the late 40s or early 50s, a chambermaid was climbing the stairs in the Point Cabin that led to a small card room. A guest surprised her and she fell backwards, tumbling down the stairs and breaking her neck, causing her death. Since that incident, there have been numerous happenings in the Point Cabin. One of those happenings occurred during the winter in an era when the hotel was open only during the summer months. There were workers in the cabin doing slight renovations to the interior. This involved placing the furniture in the middle of the room. Every morning when they came back to the cabin, they found the furniture had been moved all about. A couple of them decided to investigate, anticipating that it was staff fooling around. As they approached the cabin, they noticed the lights were on, but when they entered, the lights were off. No one was in the cabin. They exited the cabin and decided to hide a few feet away so they could catch the prankster. They saw lights turn on and smoke coming out of the chimney. Showing a remarkable amount of courage, the pair ran inside the cabin again. They found a dark room with no fire in the fireplace. Worse, the furniture had been arranged. They looked around for footprints in the snow surrounding the cabin, but found none. The employees couldn't have been entirely surprised by the situation because the haunting at the Point cabin is well known around the lodge. The switchboard has received calls from the cabin, and people had reported seeing lights going on and off, all when the cabin was unoccupied. When the cabin is occupied, the television has been known to develop a mind of its own and change channels by itself. But the maid in the Point cabin isn't the only ghost at Jasper Park Lodge. There are also the dining room ghosts. Apparently these two are an elderly couple who suddenly appear and then just as suddenly disappear from the hotel's dining room. The ghosts seem harmless, but enjoy watching staff run hysterically out of the room, according to Mario Rulli. Considering the advantages you enjoy while staying at the Jasper Park Lodge, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that at least a few souls have chosen to make this luxurious hotel their very permanent home. The Ghost of Speedway Park. Jerry Knowles was involved with Speedway Park Racetrack in the northwestern Edmonton from its inception in 1966 right through to the park's last car race in 1983. During those 18 seasons, he saw a tremendous number of changes at the track. He even saw the track, formerly a farmer's field, become haunted. There was a period of a few years during which quite a bit happened. We'd hear doors opening and closing in the tower when there was no one else around. The tower, the main building at the track, housed offices, a lounge, and a press room. The upper area had a wooden floor, and you could hear someone walking on the floor above your head. Jerry commented, adding that these sounds occurred although the upper story was empty at the time. The incidents became so frequent that everyone around Speedway began to take the haunting for granted. We always thought there was a friendly ghost there, he explained. The spirit didn't haunt only the tower, however. It roamed throughout the park and could occasionally be heard on a set of metal steps at the side of the track. Once the ghost was actually even seen. He came out of the tower and there was a figure sitting in the stands. You could see it sitting in the top corner of the stands. Graham Light, executive with the Racing Association, and I both saw it for about 20 seconds and then it was gone. We couldn't make out who it was. Jerry does, however, have his suspicions about who the ghost at the track could have been. There was a young guy living in the basement of the tower. He was only about 19 or 20 years old. A really friendly, nice young fellow and an unbelievable artist. One summer, he drove his car out just west of the city and he killed himself. The sighting in the bleachers, the phantom footsteps, and the sounds of doors slamming in the tower began after that young man's death. During our telephone interview, Jerry and I debated briefly where the young man's spirit may have gone when the park was sold. As the young man loved car racing, I suggested that he may have followed his friends to their new premise in the Kalmar area. "Oh no," Jerry stated simply. "The new track's not haunted at all. Perhaps then one of the houses in the subdivisions where the Speedway Park once stood is home to a ghost. Or perhaps the young man who stayed on at the track even in death and has now gone to his final rest." There is one other ghost story associated with Speedway Park Racetrack. It predates the story of the young man's spirit and by now has become more like a legend. No one seems to know about the sighting firsthand. only through other people's stories. It is clearly not the same apparition. This phantom is female. Her image used to be seen walking calmly about the track area. When a concerned race car enthusiast would approach her to offer assistance, she would simply vanish. Given that the land the track was laid out on used to be a farmer's field, the apparition may have been the farm wife checking on her crops.